Thank you. So as we continue the study in Philippians, I always like to do a quick recap. So Philippians is a letter that Paul is writing to the church in Philippi. Remember, Paul started the church in Philippi at the end of Acts. So Acts chapter 16, you can read how Paul started the church. A couple of the first converts were the jailer, and then also a businesswoman of fine purple cloth. So this is about 10 years later or more. Paul is in Rome in house arrest, writing letters of encouragement to this church who he knows fondly and holds them in his heart. So that's just kind of the setting as we get into the text. So overall, the three major themes of Philippians: joy, encouragement, and partnership. And then as we get into tonight's text, we're looking specifically from verses chapter 2, 5 through 18 tonight. So as we start in verse 5, have this attitude in yourself, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a bondservant and being made in the likeness of men. So here, Paul is starting to give us the reason why we should have humility. So in chapter 2, remember, he starts talking about, if you want unity with one another, you need to think of yourself less. You need to think of your brethren more. And then how to do that is like with a humble attitude. And now he's getting into why. And really the why is because we are bondservants with Jesus. So here, now you are, the translation, now that you are a follower of Christ and have put on Christ, your mindset needs to be the same as Christ. So one of the things that, usually I don't like reading directly from commentary, but in this instance I am. So as far as the words being in the form of God. So this is just something that I came across, and I thought the way that they wrote it is going to be better than I can describe it or summarize it. So I'm just going to read it for you tonight. So here, when he's talking about being in the form of God, Paul affirms that Jesus eternally has been God. The usual Greek word for being is not used here. Instead, Paul chose another term that stresses the essence of a person's nature, his continuous state or condition. Paul also could have chosen one of two words for the word form, but he chose the one that specifically denotes the essential, unchanging character of something, what it is and of itself. The fundamental doctrine of Christ's deity has always encompassed these crucial characteristics. So essentially, some denominations will come to this passage and say, Jesus is not God and man, that he was God, but when he came down to earth, he stopped being God because he took on the form of man and he essentially changed. But even going into, we know that that's not true because he's both God and man. But here, just the Greek words that were used drill down that idea even further. Paul could have chosen a variety of words, and he chooses the ones that best fit who Jesus is, and that is, he's essentially the same person in the form of man and in the form of God. So as far as something to be grasped, Jesus did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped. So what does that mean, a thing to be grasped? A thing to be grasped. How would we use that in today? Attainable? Okay. Any other ideas? Considered? All right. You didn't, okay. Considered? Any? Obtainable? Considered? All right. Understood? Yeah. not clinging to it. Okay, that's really good. So one of the things, the images that came to my mind, you all, I don't know if they still climb the gym rope in elementary school. You all remember climbing a rope in elementary school? Now you would get, I don't know, 5 or 10 feet above ground, and what would you do? You'd hold on as tight as you possibly could. There was no crazy kid, usually, that got to the top and would just let go. But I just think, when I think of being grasped, that's what was coming to my mind, is when I would get to the top of the gym, or the rope, I'm holding on as tight as I possibly can. And at no point am I ever just going to let go. But Jesus, at the highest part, he's in heaven. But it's not that I'm just going to hold on to this forever and I will never let go. He chose to let go. He chose to come down to earth and live among us. So that was the mental image that I had in my mind. And when I thought about it like that, the question that came to my mind, if you were in heaven, would you ever come back? If you were in heaven, would you ever want to come back? But if you're in hell, do you want to come back to earth if you're in hell? And so the examples that we have are, I want to get out of here to tell them, change your attitude so you don't come here. But we never really read of examples of, I'm in heaven and now I want to go back. And I think that is, I can't think of an instance. Like, when we are in heaven, it will be the most wonderful and glorious. I mean, you can't even comprehend how wonderful it will be. But being able to give that up shows humility and how much love Jesus has for us. So those are just kind of some of the thoughts that came to my mind, and I'm open to hear how others think of this passage as far as encouragement during the Lord's Supper or just in their daily life. All right. And then the last note that I have here is, as far as emptied himself, this is not self-renunciation. It's not exchanging deity to be human, but it's more of just he's not changing state, as he's not giving up being deity. Moving on to verse 8. Being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. So in which ways did Jesus humble himself? In what ways did Jesus humble himself? How many different ways did Jesus humble himself? Okay, like on the cross, he could have saved himself. Yeah. Like the willingness to take criticism or just terrible abuse from, So Josh kind of gave, so when Vivian, she just said, I need to do a better job trying to replay what people say, because sometimes it's hard to hear in the auditorium if you're one side to the other. So if I do a terrible job doing that, you're just like, that's not what I said. Say this instead, and I'll be happy doing that. But Josh gave the example of a manager, if he was rebuked by a new hire, there's no instance where the manager would just be okay with that. And it was just kind of like, who are you to rebuke me? But that is not the attitude that Jesus has. would he have humbled himself? I don't know. Yes. Um, I think it's definite form of love. Yeah. So being completely submissive to the will of God. Yeah. So there's no hierarchy essentially when like amongst human beings in his mind. So using that as an example, how does that help us today? Like what positive examples or what can we learn? How does that impact our Christian life? So knowing that we have all of these examples, how is that helpful for us today? Exactly. Yeah. So it's just a good example and pushes us to not just be Sunday and Wednesday Christians. Any other examples of how that could applies to us today, or how we use that example in our daily lives? Yeah. Thank you. Good job. Yes. Yeah. Um, that's one. Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, reality check on how easily arrogance can come into our mindset. Yeah, humility is the only true virtue. Yeah, thank you. That's wonderful. Anything else? Thank you, everyone. So this is another part. Um, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Um, so um, for ordinary people, is when we die, is it us being obedient, or is it more of a necessity? So I know that's a really weird question, but basically, for a human, death would never be an obedience. Death is something that we obey towards. It is something that all of us will inevitably come face to face with. It is a part of life. We don't get to choose, as humans, we don't get to choose if we don't obey to death. It is a necessity for humans to die. But for deity, does a person of deity, do they get to choose for themselves if they die or don't die? If you're a deity, do you have a choice? So if you are a deity, you don't have to choose death. You wake up, you come across anything, like Pam was saying, it's like, I can choose to call 10,000 angels and not die. If you're a deity, you can have a choice. You don't have to obey death. You don't have to obey death. You get to choose. But he took a route of choosing death. It's something that he chose. So to me, it was kind of another point of, example of humility. When the choice came, he was obedient to the will of the Father, and he chose death, even though being deity, he didn't have to make that choice. And then as far as why is death on a cross? Why would the death on a cross be extremely pertinent to the church in Philippi? So, yeah, so the Philippian church, so if you were a citizen of Philippi, you were a citizen of Rome. And Roman citizens, there's very, very few examples of a Roman citizen ever being crucified. It was only for heinous criminals. Um, thank you. Yeah, another form of humility. Thank you. For this reason also, God highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name which is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee will bow, of those who are in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and that every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of the God the Father. So how is Jesus exalted now? How is Jesus exalted now? Different types of examples of how Jesus is exalted. Can you think of more than one example of how he is exalted? Okay. Um, okay. So I didn't have that one on my list, but I like it. Any other examples? Are there multiple ways in which Jesus is exalted? Yeah. So he's exalted in song. Let's go ahead and turn to Acts chapter 2. Acts chapter 2 and verse 32. So the idea here that he's saying he humbled himself to the point of death, and now he is highly exalted. So the question is, how is Jesus exalted now? So Acts chapter 2 and verse 32. This Jesus God raised up again, to which we were all witness. Therefore, having been exalted to the right hand of God, and having received from the Father the promise of the Holy Spirit, he has poured forth this which you both see and hear. So here we read two different things. He's exalted physically. He's risen from the dead physically. Also, spiritually, he has ascended into heaven. And then he's also at the right hand of God. So his rank and his role has been exalted as well. So he's physically raised, spiritually he ascended into heaven, and then also his rank and his role, he is exalted. And then I have one more example, and in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, we know that he's our high priest, and so all things are under his feet. So now he has a rank of judgment, or he's able to pass on judgment. So different types of ways that he's exalted after death. So does that same idea apply to us today? If we humble ourselves, will we be exalted? Does that idea of humility and exaltation apply to us today? Donna's nodding yes. Pam is nodding yes. So how? How does it apply to us? Yeah, so we won't really be exalted in the values of the world when we humble ourselves the way Jesus did. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So then, how do we apply that? Like, how is that applicable to us in our Christian life? Yep. So I want to get to heaven. Yep. Thank you. Yeah. So the way I think about it is the steps to get to heaven is this ultimate humility. That even though I'm going through the day-to-day grind of potential, arrogance or that is not, even if I, want to, like Corey was saying, rise up in worldly standards, that's not the way to get me to heaven. The way to get to heaven is the absolute humble attitude of being a servant here on earth. So how do we apply this idea of humility and exaltation as far as church unity? So when he starts chapter 2, he's really talking about this is how you want to be a unified church. If you want to be a unified church, then you need to put other people as more important than yourselves, their ideas and their thoughts. And then he talks about how to do it, and then now he's talking about why Jesus is the perfect example. So if you kind of circle back to the beginning, the initial start was, if you want to be unified as a church, these are the steps that you do. So how do we apply this idea of humility and exaltation as far as church unity? Yeah. So that's why I'm asking you. I don't know. So as you think about church unity, how does this idea of humility and exaltation, how does it play out? Or are they not correlated at all? Okay, yeah. So even though we exalt positions in church, the leaders themselves are humbled. Or choose humble leaders, yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I think so. If we humble ourselves at the individual level, through whenever brethren have disagreements or arguments, and we humbly put their thoughts and needs above our own, then church unity as itself will raise or be exalted. Is that a roundabout way of? Okay. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, because it's at the individual level that the group then can be raised up. Thank you. Any other thoughts or ideas? Okay. Yeah. Yep, bringing others up. That's good. Thank you. Yeah. Yes. When others see the example of us loving and humbly being humble, it exalts the Lord. Really good. Thank you. Any other example? exaltation is something to be grasped in the future with the Lord. Thank you. Yeah, still provide good gifts even if people aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. Thank you. So then the last thought that I had is just how opposite it is as far as why Jesus is the perfect example. So I think back to when Lawrence Kelly was here doing, I don't really remember what the exact service was about, but he was talking about how or why it's so important to be quick to hear. He said, in usual interactions of confrontation, the natural human instinct is for us to rise up and want to overpower, like our ideas and our thoughts and our wants are so much more powerful, and I'm just going to crush you. And my genius comebacks of blows are just going to humble you. And that is what the world thinks of, is I'm going to rise up myself, exalt myself to crush you with my thoughts and ideas and opinions. But it's the exact opposite of what we're called to do. And that we're called to humble ourselves so that our unity is not rising up to crush each other, but to be unified with each other through humility and love. And so when I read these passages, it's just always a reminder to me of how opposite it is from the worldly idea of what natural feelings are. So that was how I was trying to relate it to my everyday walk. So moving on to verse 12. So then, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who is at work in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. So to work out means to continually work to bring something to fulfillment or completion. It's not referring to salvation by works, but it is referring to your responsibility to actively pursue obedience. So this is not you working your works getting you to heaven, but it is actively pursuing obedience. So according to Paul, what is to be our attitude as we work out our salvation? What is our attitude to be? What is our attitude to be as we work out our salvation? All right, yeah, good attitude. Do it with a good attitude without murmuring or complaining. Okay, yep, fear. Do it out of fear. All right. Okay, yeah. Knowledge of the consequences. So most people, you guys can tell I don't work out. But when I did, I always had a goal. So I would used to do running competitions or exercise. I mean, most people that work out, do they just do it because they like it, or do they do it because they have a goal in mind? I would suggest a lot of people have some type of goal in mind, but it's a constant working out is they're pursuing something. And that might even be my goal is to maintain where I currently am doing. Like as I get older, it's like all I want to do is I don't want to get injured while I sleep. And so it's like I'm going to do some back exercises or some stretching or some yoga so that when I sleep and wake up, I'm not injured. But it's a goal of pushing through. And so to me, when I'm thinking about working out your salvation, the fear and trembling is what's going to happen if I'm not working out my salvation. That's a fear and a trembling. And my goal is to get to heaven. And as, if our goal every single day is, I want to get to heaven, what can I do to work that out? How much different would your daily actions be? So that was how I was kind of using it as personal application of setting a goal. If I want to get to heaven and I'm going to set a workout plan, what are the things that I need to do to get that accomplished? So verses 14 through 16. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, so that you will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent children, children of God above reproach, in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you appear as lights in the world, holding fast the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I will have reason to glory, because I did not run in vain, nor toil in vain. So what is the difference between complaining and disputing? Or grumbling and disputing? What's the difference between grumbling and disputing, or complaining and disputing? Yeah. So complaining is almost about feelings. I'm asking. And then disputing disputing could be more of like, I've thought about this and I think you're wrong. It's like it's time to argue. Okay. Yeah, so complaining could be, no, I just don't like it. And disputing is, I'm ready to argue. Okay. Yeah. So both of them, no matter what they are, it's an attitude of the heart. So what attitude would that be? Like, you what? Yeah. So I have a 2-year-old. So the 2-year-old and the 5-year-old. So the 2-year-old will complain about food all the time. It's time to eat your chicken, and you say, I don't like chicken, I want goldfish. It's just like, and then the other thing that the 2-year-old or the 5-year-old does the most is, please clean up your room. Why? Annie, go clean up your room. Why? Is that a form of disputing? Yeah. And then for the 2-year-old, it's like, I don't like goldfish, or I don't like chicken, I want goldfish. Complaining. And both of them, as far as it's just selfishness. Like what I am being told, I don't want to do. And I'm either going to complain about it and just say, that's not what I want. That's not what I want. I'm going to complain about it. Or I'm going to ask you why, and I'm going to argue about it. Well, why do I have to do that? It's like, because I don't want to do that, so why do you think I have to do that? And yet, those are the two things. So, like answering Josh's point, I think he's absolutely right. It's like the attitude of the heart, ultimately, to me, is selfishness. And it's so easy for those things to come out, either through grumbling or disputing. And yet, how do we prove ourselves to be blameless and innocent? Blameless and innocent. By not opening our mouths. So do all things without grumbling or disputing, so that you will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent, and being children of God above reproach in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation. So we will be noticed. We will be noticed if we aren't complainers. We will be noticed if we aren't grumblers. And both of those things are active ways of showing humility. So I think, how do you show humility? You don't grumble and you don't complain. And those things will be seen from the world. So that in the day of Christ I will have reason to glory, because I did not run in vain nor toil in vain. All right, so in what specific situations today do you need to make a concentrated effort not to grumble or question God's dealings? What specific situations today do you need to make a concentrated effort not to grumble or complain? Can you think of any examples in your personal life? What specific situations can I make a concentrated effort not to grumble or complain? All right, towards our leadership. Wonderful. Don't fuss when the preacher goes over 10 minutes. All right. When you think he did. Any other examples? Don't complain in the car on the way home. I think the common saying is we're not going to have roasted Christians for lunch. About leadership, about our jobs, about a whole list of things. But I think as we go through these examples of how do Christians,